For those of you who don't know Mary Stark Harper, if you go to your handy dandy, this is the life of Claire Fagin, and you open it up so that you see 1951. The picture on top is a picture of Claire with Mary Stark Harper and Kari Ryder, who is, of course, the head of the Hartford Foundation. So you have an image of Mary. Mary is the grandmother of psychogeriatric nursing. She has participated in every White House summit meeting on the aging since 1950. She was nursing at NIMH for decades, and she was the visible presence. Her career has spanned from literally the time of the Tuskegee experiments. She was on campus then, and she actually was a public health nurse, not, of course, fully understanding what was going on then, to the current time. And she is a colleague after whom a psychogeriatric health center was named. So if you think about that span, she is a glorious name for us to revere as colleagues. We named this special time because she was the first person who we, in fact, as part of leadership, embarked on a conversation with. We have deliberately chosen individuals in the leadership program who are living legends by any criteria, and Mary Stark Harper was. So that is to tell you something about who we are honoring with this particular activity. Let me now get into the specific person we're talking about. And before our conversation starts, I wanted to take my framework for orchestrating a career, not recapitulating Dr. Claire Fagin's career, but showing you for every stage of development some little factoids that her career is the epitome of orchestrating a full career. Certainly when it comes to preparation, she has a bachelor's from Wagner College, a master's from Teachers College, Columbia, and a doctorate from NYU. When you think then of her moving from preparation to independent contributions, you see an individual whose doctoral thesis is on rooming in, and in fact that dissertation then leads to policy changes with parents now being able to be visiting and integral members of pediatric facilities. She then went on to do work at Children's Hospital in D.C., to be the assistant chief for psych nursing services at the clinical center at the National Institutes of Health. There are her own writings at this period show her independent contributions. In 1953, she writes Desirable Functions and Qualifications of Psychiatric Nurses. So she actually writes a definitive statement about her specialty area. In 1966, she writes The Effects of Maternal Attendance During Hospitalization on the Behavior of Young Children. These are books I'm talking about, not articles. She then goes on to write books on family-centered nursing and nursing and child psychiatry. So you see in the stage of independent contributions that she is taking that commitment to psychiatric nursing, that concern about particularly the mental health well-being of children and families, and she is producing in that area. But then she moves on to the third stage of program development, where now she moves from not just being concerned about her own development, but facilitating the development of the home institution. And NYU is blessed with her as the director of graduate programs. Lehman College at City University of New York has her as a department.
Claire, move on from the rhythm of those early years to, I'm interested in what you now, when you look back, say, you know, when I was getting to adulthood, a young adult, these are things that I did that shaped me. I didn't know it at the time how much they would then wind up shaping what I would do later on. Reminisce a little bit about your own decision-making and your interest in nursing, and as a young adult, what choices you made that held you in good stead, or maybe didn't hold you in good stead.
Well, all of you know that I'm one of the few people of my generation who, I think you know this, some of you have probably heard this story. I was at a meeting quite some years ago with many people who you would know all of. You would know all of these people, actually, if I mention their names, which I will not. And we were with a leader, a group leader. It was at some convention, and there was this, just as we had today, interest group meeting. This was a sort of interest group meeting of people who were deans or had been deans or were in positions of that sort. It was pre-Penn, by the way. And I was in this, so it was quite some years ago. But nonetheless, I was in a group that was more or less my age, some less, and nobody more, about the same age as me, my cohort, I would say, with a few younger than me. And this leader turned to this group and said, how many of you would choose nursing now? And one person raised her hand, me. And I said to the group, and I truly mean this, that's why we're in so much trouble. Because my cohort would not have chosen nursing if they had other choices. They would have chosen something else. I chose nursing very late. I was already in college when I decided that I was going to be a nurse. And once I decided, each time that I had another degree, I said to myself, do I really want to stay in this field? And each time I made a concrete decision, yes. And here are these people that we all respect. I mean, you'd be stunned if I told you their names. Not one of them raised her hand. And I do believe, Meg Bourbonnier said earlier at a meeting, which, you know, we didn't discuss, was why can't we get this educational act together? You know what? I think that's part of it. Because they were never really fully committed. They had wonderful careers. Wonderful careers. But it was always like secondary. They realized later, years later, gee, if I'd been in another generation, I could have been a whatever. And the fact of the matter is, in my generation, you know what? I could have been a whatever. And that's where my family was intending me to be, a whatever. Not a...
Say more, Claire, about from Bellevue to when you started taking academic positions.
Well, I didn't expect to do that. I thought I would actually be in nursing practice for as long as I could think. I never thought forward. And some of you have heard me say this before, too. I didn't plan my career. I think like now, you know, we talk about career planning. I didn't have any planning. I didn't think about planning a career. Things evolved, and I was very lucky because they evolved wonderfully. But what happened to me at Bellevue was interesting, and I do attribute it to a person that I considered a nursing leader. I was at this point a ward instructor, and you're too young to know what ward instructors are. It's probably the best nursing job there is in the world because you're really a clinician, you're working with patients as a staff nurse, but meanwhile, because you have...
And get us from Washington and what you're doing there to moving towards actually then taking over programs.
Oh, well, now, by the way, you talked about academic. I'm still in clinical work, of course. I mean, I zipped right back into clinical work after my job at the League, and which you mentioned in the desirable functions and qualifications of psychiatric nurses. But then, I'm like Mary Harper. Mary Harper, I mean, I'm so sorry that you couldn't have heard Mary Harper, because Mary Harper described her career. And finally, after, you know, having an extremely difficult childhood, very poor, managing to get to, was it Hampton no, Tuskegee. Tuskegee with 30 cents in her pocket, and the dean loved her and took her in to live with her and so forth and so on. But then she finally got her master's and tried to get a job. And she couldn't. She took a job as an aide, is what she said when she was here. Okay, so I have my master's degree. I have this extraordinary experience. I have two experiences now from Washington. I have clinical center And then I was, the term now is psychiatric liaison. I was the first psychiatric liaison person in the United States at Children's Hospital. I worked for the Department of Psychiatry, and what I did was what is now called psychiatric liaison work. Then nobody ever heard of it then. And so I developed a little study and was going to be funded by NIMH, which incidentally I wasn't, because I left to come to New York, because at that point we decided it was actually, we came for Sam's academic work. He wanted to get a doctorate or a master's at the Courant Institute at NYU, a math master's. He had an engineering master's. And we decided it was his turn now, because I'd had, come down there, I'd had great jobs. It didn't matter to me because I could get a great job. So as a result, I left Children's Hospital, which did get funded for that liaison work. And the person who was funded was a psychologist, not a nurse. They didn't bring another nurse in. And she was terrific. Her name was Mary Robinson, and they did that. It was the first study ever done on liaison psychiatry. But the site visits for that brought me in contact with people that I still know to this day. Julie Richmond, who became Assistant Secretary of HEW, the Secretary of Health, who I met because he made the site visit. And we've, talked and known each other for all these years. So everything had its, basically it was being open to every experience. That's really what that's all about. So anyway, I go back to New York. Before I go back to New York, I always try to develop my career before I leave any place, as I'm doing now, trying to find out what's my next step. Anyway, that's a semi-joke. I don't hear anyone laughing. Why are you laughing? Just be laughing.
No, you, it's not fun. It's to be expected.
Not supposed to be, he's supposed to be laughing. Anyway, I couldn't get a job. I could not get a clinical job. It's unbelievable. The VA would not hire me. And that was exactly her experience, by the way. It was the VA would not hire her. Then I thought, well, you know what? Sam is going to be working in Pleasantville. I can work at New York Hospital Bloomingdale Division, it was called then. It's now called Westchester. So I went up for an interview. She said to me, oh, no, my dear, we could never hire you. You've only had public sector experience. You could not work with our patients. Can you believe it? Anyway, so meanwhile, Dorothy Marinas, who was then beginning a new program at NYU, had passed through Clinical Center. Everybody passed through Clinical Center. My doctoral dissertation was stimulated by somebody who passed through Clinical Center. So Dorothy had said to me, Claire, if you ever move back to New York, call me. I was desperate. I would never have called her. I was truly desperate. So I called her, and she needed me because I had clinical experience. She needed me for the very reason nobody would hire me, that I had clinical experience. But, so at any rate, I went to work at NYU, and that changed everything. One of the things about that program was a great program because we were really in the field almost continuously with our students. And, hours upon hours upon hours upon hours. It was a 2-year program. We introduced community psychiatry in that program. We did a lot of great, innovative things.
And where is that in relationship to getting your own doctorate?
Well, we had to do it. Remember, Martha Rogers was the head, and so we had to start working on, it was also not part of my plan at all, but I did take one course just to keep them happy. And then I started working there in 56. 58, we adopted Joshua, and I left. But then we moved to Manhattan, and when he was 2, and I started going to the park. And nobody I knew was ever in the park. The children were, but they weren't with the mothers. They were with the nannies. So I'd say, where is Mrs. So-and-so? She's shopping. Now, I must tell you, there is a couple of secrets to my career. One, I hate shopping. That is major. I hate shopping. 2, I have very few hobbies. I don't play golf. I don't play tennis or polo.
I want to get you from there to...
We have a long way to go.
Let's dance our way to when you're really now developing programs yourself. And while you had had administrative positions elsewhere, your years as dean of the School of Nursing at Penn were really transformative. And I'd like you to talk about your decision to go there, your notion of what it meant to be then a dean, to change a school and work with faculty. And by this time you had had many personal accomplishments.
But I had already done it. Mm-hmm. Remember, I went to Lehman. Mm-hmm. And I think what you captured there, I'm not trying to sound vain, but what you captured there was something very important. You said I moved from something to you're from home to the whole profession or something like that. What happened to me at NYU was the following. First of all, Dorothy left in 1965, 64, and went to the University of Pennsylvania as dean. And so that's when I became the director of both programs. I was the director of the child psych program, and I became the director of the whole division. And it turned into a very large division. I had big grants and a lot of faculty when I left there. However, I was starting to get disappointed because I am, as I started out by telling you, a very firm believer in nursing and nursing intervention and the way I perceive nursing intervention. And when I was teaching psychiatric nursing, I was teaching psychiatric nursing in a very holistic way, and also a way that had to do with using yourself in many settings. And at that time we were, still in hospitals, and the pharmaceuticals weren't where they are today, and so forth. And what I would find is that my graduates, instead of doing the kind of work I wanted them to do, which was using themselves that way in therapeutic communities and so forth and so on, all wanted to be therapists. So, that was not the purpose of my program. I didn't set it up for them to be therapists, and I respect them all, and I think they're wonderful, and if that's what they want to be, okay. So I decided I couldn't really influence people at the master's level, but what I wanted to do was to influence people from an earlier period. So I decided I wanted to go into baccalaureate education. Meanwhile, the position was open because there was no, it was open because there was no program there at Lehman College, and that was going to be that position, or that division or department, whatever it was actually, the creation of that department was caused by Montefiore Hospital, which wanted a baccalaureate program in its neck of the woods in the Bronx. And so they convinced the president of Lehman College to start a baccalaureate program in nursing. And so I had a friend recommend me for it, because you should always try to have somebody else recommend you when there's a search going on. And 4 of us left NYU at the same time, and 4 of us left for very major positions, and I went to Lehman. Okay. What happened at Lehman was really the beginning of a transformative experience for me. Lehman was, I cannot describe to you what a jewel it was. I went to Lehman with a concept of what I wanted to do, and that was also written up. And we talked about writing in one of our little groups today. Everything is written. Every experience you must write up. And this was an editorial in the American Journal of Nursing, which said, the public will buy what it needs and wants. And this was my concept. I remember I was working with Martha Rogers. So that title was an immediate, banner. Mm-hmm. Because Martha Rogers' view is, it's what you know that counts. In other words, basically you don't have to show it. What you know will come out. You don't have to talk it. You can walk the walk, but you don't talk the talk. And I really, really disagreed with that. And that's what that was. That was a banner headline. She knew damn well that I was talking about her. And so I went, and she didn't talk to me for years, by the way. For several reasons, because what I did at Lehman was I developed what I called a primary care program at the baccalaureate level. And we taught we were the first in the country, that we were written up again everywhere, and it was a model program. In fact, I'll tell you a Penn experience in a second, but also Dorothy Marinas. But at any rate, so I decided it was going to be a primary care program. But here I was, a psychiatric nurse. I knew zip, even today, somebody falls down in front of me, and everybody says, she's a nurse, she's a nurse. Poor soul. Totally pitiful. But it was probably pitiful then as well. So I had this concept, but I needed these wonderful, brilliant people to put meat on these bones that I had. So I got the most wonderful people in the world. Several of them were sitting in the first row. I got the most incredible people. Diane McGivern, B. Goodwin, Maddie, Liz came later, Neville came later. Unbelievable. It was a total jewel. And what happened is I became the queen of the campus. Now, that campus is the Bronx City University campus. And they didn't want nursing. No way. Absolutely.
How'd you get to be the first Ivy League
Well, I think it's all the same. You know, I think you've heard everything, actually. You can ask me whatever you like, because you really have. It's really all the same. What happened was I made the school known, and I made nursing known. And I went throughout the country doing alumni talks, not just nursing alumni, because the president could count on me. He knew that I wasn't going to be doing, a big speech for the School of Nursing. He knew I was going to be out there for the University of Pennsylvania. So he always brought a dean, so he would bring me a lot to the alumni events. And I had a shtick. I had my little thingy that was also published, which was before you saw these things on TV. It was called Whose Body Is It Anyway? So I would give this speech to alumni about the bodies and about insurance, and I would always manage to get my own thing in, which was universal health care. You know how far I've gotten with that. And at any rate, so what happened is I got to know the alumni very, very, very well. They all knew me all over the country. All the alumni knew me. All the trustees knew me. I was a very safe bet, and I told them immediately I was not going to, be a candidate for the position. Some people didn't think it was ridiculous. I thought it was ridiculous. And it was easier for me to say than for anybody else to say. And the faculty knew me very well. But it was not any different than the Lehman picture. I'm looking to see nodding heads in the front row. Am I wrong? The principles are all the same. It's getting out there, it's being known, it's doing your job, it's doing it well, it's having wonderful graduates, wonderful alumni, and just making sure you're not only on the front page, you're in the preface of everything anybody's thinking, and you fight for it. Sheldon Hackney, who was the president for many of my years at Penn, gave speeches all the time. He never mentioned us. So one day in the museum, we had a lot of things in the museum, the University Museum, which is one of the great museums in the world. I caught him in the front of the museum. People are coming in and going out. And I said, Sheldon, again, you mentioned medicine, you mentioned this one, and you didn't mention nursing. He yelled at me right there in the lobby. He said, "Get off my back, Claire." He said, "You and your faculty are always so sensitive." So with the tears falling out of my eyes, I said, "You know what? We're sensitive because you neglect us all the time in your public speeches." And the people are walking into this museum wondering, who are these two nuts here screaming at each other? This woman is crying and yelling at him, and he's yelling at her. I don't think that happens anymore at Penn, but he was that's not because of me. I don't think that's because of me. I think what happened is I conquered the situation, and then people don't have to carry on like this anymore. But, I don't think we have that much leeway. I think if somebody is a mouse in the, for the next 10 years or something, which thank God we don't have. Afaf Malise is anything but a mouse. So if Neville as interim dean was anything but a mouse. But, if you have a mouse, the same thing can happen all over again. You disappear.
What did you learn as president of the university?
I learned that was the right place for me. And had I thought about it sooner, I don't know that I would have wanted to be any place else. I was offered the provostship, by the way, at the University of Maryland. And I looked at it very carefully, and I realized that I didn't want that. The only thing I liked was the house. That wasn't enough. But that also made me realize I did not want to be a provost. And so Sheldon actually, with all of this yelling at me and everything, he wanted me to be a candidate for the provostship at Penn. He did not want me in the job, I can tell you that. And I said to him, "Sheldon, number one, I don't want the job. Number two, you don't want me in the job. Why should I do this?" He said, "I need you."